All right, good afternoon. We are about 1 week from the end of session, and things actually progressing very nicely. We have invited the governor to visit with us here in just about 15 minutes, so we'll look forward to that meeting. Obviously, he wasn't available to meet with us this morning, but look forward to sitting down and coming up with bills that not only can pass the legislature, but he can sign. So with that, Senator Gazelka, and then we can take some questions.
Let me just say I was surprised at the governor's most recent requests, $130 million for education at this late place in what we're doing is next to impossible. If you saw what we did early in session, we all talked about a bonding bill, a tax conformity bill. As we moved into session, we talked about safe schools. We talked about doing something about opioid abuse and elder care abuse, and MNLARs, fixing MNLARs, and we even got a letter from the governor on that roughly, I'm just guessing here, but about 4 to 6 weeks ago. And so this $130 million for education, with all of those things that we need to do, is next to impossible. And we got it at such a late date that I don't see how that possibly can happen and do all the other things that we agreed to. And another one that we agreed to was fixing the pension problem. And so all of those things are on the table. We've all been working on those, and suddenly, if we try to do this, many of those have to come off the table. So, questions?
What do you say about the tax bill then? He was pretty definitive, no school aid, no tax bill.
So I serve on the tax committee, and we all know with the federal changes that happened in November, the most significant tax changes since 1986, that we have to conform. If we don't conform, Minnesota's tax filing becomes very, very difficult. And so we all agree that that's important to do. And so if we choose not to do that, it makes it difficult for all of Minnesotans. And one of the things we did on the tax bill, the House and Senate have come to basically an agreement waiting for the governor to engage, is it does raise taxes a little bit on businesses. And we took all of the money, $140 million, and drove that towards the individuals so that individuals didn't have to pay more in taxes. And we figured out a way to do it where over 99% won't pay taxes. And so we can't then just throw all that out and try to fit this in the end. But if we don't do a tax bill, that would be a shame for Minnesota.
Yeah, I think obviously, in order for us to get to some agreement, we all have to sit down around the table together. And I know we're at the point in session where it's time to do that. We look forward to sitting down with the governor to talk about what his priorities are. And we know since the beginning of session, even before session, when we did our press briefing at that time, we all talked about the importance of a tax conformity bill. We know that at the federal level, folks are going to be able to do their tax returns on a postcard. And if we don't take action, or the governor doesn't sign a tax bill this year, I'm not sure the Revenue Department in the state of Minnesota will even be able to prepare the documents for people to file their taxes next year. And if they do, it will likely take a document the size of a phone book. So this is a pretty important thing, and I think the governor knows that. Unfortunately, the governor's tax bill really is a non-starter with us. The governor's tax bill, as you all know, according to the tax incidence study that was prepared by his own department, the governor's tax bill raises taxes on every income level of Minnesotans. That's something that was not a priority for us. We want to make sure that Minnesotans are held harmless or see a tax reduction. And our tax reduction goes to middle-income Minnesotans from $35,000 in income on up. Most folks under $35,000 likely don't pay state taxes, so really this hits the heart of most Minnesotans and gives us the most beneficial impact, we think, for Minnesota families.
John, what question are you willing to give up tax cuts by not giving them school aid?
We're going to pass a tax conformity bill that helps Minnesotans prepare their taxes next year and hopefully lets them keep a little more of their money. But ultimately, the goal of this bill is tax conformity to make it easier for Minnesotans to file their taxes. We hope that the governor will participate in that process. If he doesn't, it's going to be very difficult to get to some agreement. But we've invited him to a meeting. We've invited the governor to a meeting today at 2 o'clock. We tried to meet with him this morning. My hope is that we'll see him in a few minutes at 2 o'clock and we can start to discuss these things. As far as, I sent a letter on school aid, the emergency school funding that the governor's requesting. He didn't talk about this before session. He didn't talk about it when session started. He has never spoken to either of us, or hasn't spoken to me about it. I don't know if he's spoken to the senator about it. Never had a conversation, and we talk quite frequently. The governor did not include it in his supplemental budget. So it looks like a political thing. I hope that it's not. I hope that he's genuine about it. But I sent a letter last week saying that if this is important, it needs to have hearings in the legislature, and it was introduced by the governor too late in the process to get the sort of overview and vetting that it will need by the legislature to become law. And he's calling it emergency funding, and in Minnesota, we deal with emergency funding by having emergency special sessions. So he certainly can call a special session for us to deal with this over the interim, but we're going to work on the things that the governor has talked about and we have talked about not only before session, but during session, and we hope that he will stay engaged or get engaged in that process.
Is a special session the only way to end the impasse?
No, we don't need a special session at all. We certainly just want to accomplish the work that we all came here to accomplish. Number one, that's tax conformity. We do have an education bill that invests needed dollars into the safety and security of our schools and fixes other problems. We've got a lot of work into these bills, and we hope that the governor will engage in the process now so we can get to agreement. Senator?
Yeah, and so as far as do we need a special session, we do not need a special session. But if this new money that he's asking for for education, keep in mind that last year we did the 2-year budget. It was $1.3 billion of new money for education. This year we said we'd fix their pension, and I think we have come to agreement, if we can move that forward, that will be fixed. Plus we have money for safe and secure schools. And so it's not like we're not doing anything for education. We just know that other things need to be addressed as well. And like I said, we all talked about these priorities. All of the priorities that I just mentioned earlier, the governor was talking about as well, until suddenly this change at the very end. And that's why it's too much too late. We can work on this next year and get it done, or if he calls a special session, that would be something we would consider then as well. So it's next to impossible to do the $130 million that the governor's asking for. Keep in mind we have $329 million. $140 million of that went to the tax bill. Again, that was so Minnesotans on the individual side did not pay a tax increase. Even though we lowered their brackets a little bit, but that was so that they wouldn't get a tax increase. And so if you add that and then you add the pensions that we need to fix, MNLARs that we need to fix, safe schools, opioid abuse, MNLARs, all of those are things that take money and cause us not to have the resources that he wants.
Mr. Leader, the governor says that the business tax rates are disproportionate in terms of the bracket changes and also the foreign. Are you willing to perhaps back off on those a little bit so there might be some money for education?
So the question is, the governor's saying that would we back away from what he would call business tax cuts? And I want to tell you that as we look at the numbers, corporations will pay $35 million more under the agreed tax plan between the House and Senate. So it's not like we're asking them to pay less. They're paying more right now, but we wanted to use that $140 million to drive down the cost to the individual, asking businesses to pay a little bit, but we don't expect them to have another tax increase when we're already in the top 5 worst states for businesses.
I would add to that, businesses in our tax plan do pay more, and it's so that middle-income Minnesotans can pay less. In the governor's tax plan, every income bracket of Minnesotans will pay more under the governor's tax plan. And as far as we're concerned, that's a non-starter. We don't think now is the time when we have a surplus like this to increase taxes on Minnesota families and ask them to pay more.
And help us understand, where do businesses pay more under the conference, the agreement?
Yeah, through a function of the federal tax conformity, if you look at getting rid of all of the deductions and things that they are losing, and then, yes, they're getting a rate reduction, but net, they are still getting a tax increase. So businesses under the Republican tax plan will have a slight tax increase. Minnesotans will have a fairly sizable tax decrease and a very meaningful tax decrease that will help Minnesota families.
It's an interaction between the federal and the state.
Yeah. So as we conform to the federal bill, that's where they're going to have the tax increases. We agreed to take $50 million of deemed foreign income that they would pay. The governor did not want the tax triggers, so as a good faith step, we got rid of the tax triggers. That was one of the things he said he did not want. The governor said he didn't want us to move any farther on the estate tax, so we went back to where we were last year. And so we feel like we've made good faith efforts with the governor, but we need him to engage, and the $130 million more on his request right now is just unworkable.
When is the latest you could take a vote on that bill and still leave yourself enough time if there is an override potential, if the governor isn't in agreement with you?
Well, our plan was to work with the governor to the end. We hope to continue to do that. We hope that he comes to the table to work with us as far as both the tax bill, the bonding bill, and the omnibus spending bill. And so I don't really want to put a date on there. We can go all the way till midnight Sunday night. I would love it if we got done Friday at midnight, but I've heard that lots of people promise that and rarely does it happen.
So what about time for override? Just to go back to Brian's question, do you need to pass it just to
It would be
careful
3
like
days.
midweek?
From the time we pass a bill, 3 days, 3 days later is what we have to have.
Is that impossible?
It's possible, but I don't think that's the way we really want to go. We want the governor to engage with us. That's what we're asking him to do.
Another quick issue for down the road. Where does the Senate GOP caucus stand on the sports gambling now that the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down the federal law?
I don't know that we have an opinion at this point. If you're asking for a caucus position, we've not caucused it, so I can't give you that at this point.
Personally, we're using
I don't want to make a comment on it.
Why not?
Because
President Garofalo at a news conference saying as soon as we can, we should make this legal in Minnesota. And we asked him, well, the senator is up and the senator's problem.
well, generally, personally, I have been opposed to expanding gambling, but we'll have to see. A couple of years ago, it went through in the tax committee. There was bipartisan support against it. We'll see where that is from now.
Thank you.